The Entire Life of Napoleon Bonaparte, a gentle, detailed bedtime story. Once upon a time, in the year 1769, on the quiet island of Corsica, there was born a boy named Napoleon Bonaparte. The soft winds of the Mediterranean carried the scent of salt and wild herbs into his family's modest home. At night, the stars twinkled above the dark sea, and little Napoleon would stare at them, wondering what lay beyond the horizon. He was small and serious, thoughtful beyond his years. He read stories of Julius Caesar, of Alexander the Great, of heroes who had changed the world. And in his heart, a dream began to grow. When Napoleon was just 9 years old, he left Corsica for France. The journey was long. The ship rocked gently over the waves. The boy watched as his island home disappeared into the distance. At the military school, far from home, Napoleon worked harder than anyone else. He studied history and math, and most of all, the science of war. Years passed. The French Revolution began. The streets of Paris echoed with the cries of liberty. And Napoleon, now a young man, was called to serve. Crossed towards the siege of Toulon. Napoleon's first taste of true battle came at Toulon, a port city taken by the enemies of France. The young officer studied the city's defenses carefully. He moved the cannons into place under the cover of night. With precise aim, he helped retake the city. The leaders noticed him. A star had begun to rise. Crossed towards the Italian campaign. In 1796, Napoleon was given command of the Army of Italy. His men were tired, hungry, and poor. But Napoleon spoke to them gently, with passion. He promised them glory. And so, they followed him. Together they crossed the Alps, cold winds biting at their faces, snow crunching beneath their boots. At Lodi, Napoleon led a charge across a narrow bridge, cannonballs splashing into the river below. At Arcole, he seized a flag and urged his men forward through the marshes. Victory after victory, they defeated the mighty Austrian Empire. At night, beneath the stars, Napoleon would write letters to Josephine, his beloved, sharing his dreams of peace. Crossed towards the Egyptian adventure. In 1798, Napoleon sailed across the sea to Egypt. The desert stretched out endlessly, golden and silent. At the Battle of the Pyramids, his soldiers formed squares, their bayonets gleaming in the sun. They faced the fierce Mamluks and triumphed. But the sea was not kind. At Abu Qir Bay, the British Navy destroyed Napoleon's fleet. The sands of Egypt grew lonely. After many months, Napoleon returned quietly to France. Crowned a rise to emperor. Back home, France was weary of chaos. The people longed for order. Napoleon became first consul, then emperor. A simple crown was placed on his head in Notre Dame Cathedral, but the weight of responsibility was heavier than gold. He built new laws, the Napoleonic Code, to bring justice. He built roads and schools. But Europe's kings did not trust him. They gathered their armies. Crossed towards the Battle of Austerlitz. In 1805, at Austerlitz, the sun rose through the mist, glinting on frozen ponds. Napoleon's army was outnumbered. But he saw what others did not, a weakness in the enemy's line. His soldiers struck like lightning. The Austrians and Russians fled. It was Napoleon's greatest victory. Crossed towards the march into Spain. But in Spain, things were harder. The people rose against him. The war there dragged on, bitter, slow, with no glory. Guerrilla fighters haunted the French columns. The land itself seemed to resist him. Crossed towards the Russian campaign. In 1812, Napoleon led his greatest army, over 500,000 men, into Russia. The fields of Europe rolled beneath their feet. They crossed the Niemen River, marching ever eastward. At Borodino, the cannons roared. The field was filled with smoke and sorrow. At last, they reached Moscow, but the city burned. And the cold came. The terrible cold. The long retreat began. Snow fell softly over broken wagons. Horses sank into drifts. Men shivered beneath thin coats. The rivers froze. the dream turned to nightmare. Crossed swords, the final battles. The nations of Europe united against him. At Leipzig, the Battle of the Nations, the French lines gave way. Napoleon returned to Paris, his heart heavy. He was sent to the island of Elba. But the story was not yet done. Crossed swords, the 100 Days and Waterloo. In 1815, Napoleon escaped Elba and returned to France. The people greeted him with cheers. Old soldiers rejoined his ranks. Hope bloomed once more. But at Waterloo, in the rain and mud of Belgium, his luck ran out. The British and Prussian armies stood firm. The cannons fell silent. Waterway exile and the end. Napoleon was sent to St. Helena, far in the Atlantic. The sea whispered around the rocky shores. Each day, he walked alone, thinking of all he had done, all he had lost. And at night, he looked up at the stars, the same stars he had gazed upon as a child on Corsica. Crescent moon. And so, as you listen to this story, let the soft winds of history guide you into sleep. Imagine the quiet fields, the endless sea, and the gentle stars above. Napoleon's journey is over. The world is at peace. And now, so are you. Good night.